sort of the rules of the sky were if you're a fighter pilot and the other plane, if their canopy comes off, that's a sign that the pilot's going to bail out. So you stop shooting. And that's what the other pilot did. He did allow my uncle to bail out.
You are listening to the Stories Behind the Stars podcast, and I'm your host, Tatiana Fallon. This podcast is run by the organization Stories Behind the Stars. We have the goal of writing a story for every American service member killed during World War II. That's over 420,000. We are accomplishing this goal through amazing volunteers who you will hear in this podcast as they research and write these stories. If you're at all interested in becoming a volunteer and researching and writing these stories, please check us out at storiesbehindthestars.org. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy this amazing content that we're finding. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today I have John with me, John Meyer. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. Yes.
John, could you take a little bit and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and then what brought you to this project?
Okay. Well, my name is John Meyer. I am a Army veteran. I served in the Army Reserves back in the 80s. Was a combat engineer for a while, and I recently retired from 35 years with the railroad, and for a number of years I've been searching for details about my Uncle Ray. He was a 19-year-old fighter pilot in World War II. He was lost on the 28th of June, 1943, while protecting the bombers over Italy. And when he didn't come back, the Air Force at the time simply said, failed to return, cause unknown. And probably about 25 years ago, I started doing a little research about him. One of the things that got me going with that is my grandmother had this beautiful painting of my uncle in her living room. And I have that now. And started searching a little bit more about my uncle, found a lot of stuff. And by accident, a little over 15 years ago, I actually found a family on the island of Sardinia. And this family, their father was 13 years old at the time, and he witnessed the air battle in which my uncle's P-40 was shot down, watched him bail out of his burning plane. Tragically, it was too low for his parachute to fully open, and he died when he landed. And about 15 years ago, we actually went out to the island and met the family and stuff. And it was so amazing. We're standing on the street corner. The father's talking. Some of their friends are talking, telling stories, what it was like in war-torn Italy in 1943. A friend of theirs is translating everything to English for us. And the whole time I'm looking down the street at this one doorway about a block away. After about 20, 30 minutes of all the storytelling, we go a few blocks over and we go to this open field, and I'm told this is the place where my uncle's plane crashed. So we visited there. In fact, later I was given shell casing, some 50 caliber bullets that were recovered from my uncle's plane. So I actually have parts of his plane after it crashed. But after that, we walked around the corner, went up the street, stopped right in front of the doorway that I kept looking at. And they said, this is the spot that my uncle landed and died. And my family used to have this big, long Polish name. And this young 13-year-old boy walks up to my uncle's body, sees the big long Polish name on his flight suit. And the first thought in his mind was, why is the Polish Air Force down here fighting us? And not realizing that in the U.S., for the most part, your talents determine what you could do, not where you're from or anything like that. So because of all the research that I've done about my uncle, and in the last several years, both my wife and I have been involved with a veterans group for the 325th Fighter Group, also known as the Checkertail Clan. That's a name that Axel Sally proudly gave to that group. And well, actually, she called them the Checkertail Bastards. But after the war, the guys decided to clean it up a little bit. It says, we're not going to have our families coming to a reunion of bastards. We're going to be the Klan. So that's how that got going. And I've been heavily involved with that. And because my uncle was killed, most of the reunions, and rightly so, the reunions were there to celebrate surviving the war. And because my uncle was killed, I sort of looked at things from a little bit of a different point of view. If you've been on the Battle Monument Commission that runs all of our overseas cemeteries, every day they post on Facebook a remembrance of one of the people buried in their cemeteries, a lot of times from World War II, sometimes World War I, sometimes other battles. So I sort of took that several years ago, and I started researching all the members of the Checkertail that are still overseas. And I started doing something like that on our Facebook page to remember the guys who are still, as I would say, that are still deployed overseas. You know, there's about 60 members of the 325th that are still buried or were never found and are memorialized overseas. And then a while back, I found out about this project, and it's like, wow, this is sort of the next step to what I was already doing, and doing a little more research. And I'm very lucky because I have several books by pilots and other people about the Checkertails. So I can go back to these books and get a lot of details. And even if they're not mentioned directly in the book, I can find out details about the mission they were flying and different things like that. Where were they flying from? So that's, you know, sort of how I got started and doing this. And I've sort of given myself the mission to find and write stories about every member of the 325th that I can find and share it. In fact, the Battle Monument Commission, I finally got some good email addresses from them. So when I visited my uncle's cemetery a couple of times in the past, they said they want to get information about the people that are in their cemeteries. So the story that I'm writing up and all the pictures and all the documents that I get, I'm sharing that with the overseas cemeteries. So they have all of that. So they also can share.
So is your uncle's buried here in the States, or is he still overseas?
He is still overseas. He's buried at the Sicily Rome Cemetery. It's about a 45-minute train ride south of Rome. It's real close to the Anzio battlefields. And beautiful area. I've had the honor of visiting there twice. Members of the Checkertails were talking about going to Italy as a group in May of next year. The town of Lassina, which is on the other side of the country from Rome, when the 325th moved forward to a new air base there, and at that time they were the most forward air base in all of Europe. The townspeople said that the Nazis stopped bombing them because as the Nazis were pulling north, they didn't like anyone that didn't support them. And even if the local farmers really didn't care what was going on, it's like, hey, I got my crops to take care of, I got my cattle or whatever. If they did not directly support them, the Nazis didn't like them, so they would fly over and strafe cattle and throw small mines into farm fields and stuff. But when the 325th moved up there, and it was a little bit different how the Allies did things for the locals. When the Nazis came in, they just basically said, "We're taking that field. We don't care. We're not going to give you anything for it. We're just going to take whatever we want." When the Allies came in, they went to the landowners and said, "We want to pay you to rent your fields from you, and we will hire your local people and pay them to help us build this. And oh, by the way, when our people come in, the more skilled people, we'll help you get the power in your town going again and get the water system up and running and get the telephones up and running for you." So that's the huge difference between what the Nazis did and what the Allies were doing in 43, 44, and 45. But since they got a little off track there, sorry. But
no, actually that's super fascinating. I didn't really, I don't know very much about how the policies that we had as we reoccupied Europe. Mm-hmm. And that's really kind of fascinating to see the differences it kind of makes, as you were telling your story about visiting Italy, I was like, wow, I wonder why they were so nice to you. Like, I mean, I'm sure that was decades later, right? And your family, like they must have had a good experience with the Americans to be so welcoming and kind to you coming and visiting. And so it sounds like that's why, because like we came in and we helped them get back to somewhat of a normal life again.
Yes. And so the town 9 years ago now, they built a monument to the 325th because they feel that the Checkertails saved their town, and they have this beautiful monument. I have not had a chance to see it yet, so that's why I'm hoping on getting over there next year for the 10th anniversary of the monument going over there. And while we're over in Italy, I'm definitely wanting to get down to Sicily, Rome, to visit my uncle's grave and hopefully see a few other graves from members of the Checkertails that are there. And I'm hoping on getting up to Florence also, where another big U.S. cemetery is, and several members of the 325th are buried there also. So that's plans for the future.
Yeah, when the world is not so crazy with COVID, hopefully we'll see that soon. But tell us
no active wars close by.
Right? Yeah. Oh, Tell me a little bit about your uncle. Like, what was his reason for joining the? I guess he was in the Army Air Corps, or was he? What drew him to that rather than like a different type of service? Do you know?
I'm not exactly sure why. I know my dad's talked very, very little about my uncle. My Uncle Ray was about a year and a half older than my dad. The two of them were very, very close. And one of the stories that my grandmother told me in 1979 when I drove my old motorcycle 1,000 miles from northwest corner of Indiana out towards Cape Cod, because my dad was still at home when they got word that Ray was killed. And she said my dad was yelling, cursing, stomping his feet, very upset about that. So he talked very, very little about Ray. I do have a few old photographs of model planes that he built. A lot of them were basic stick-built planes. They didn't have, the plastic model kits we have now. And to go from, stick-built planes as a hobby to becoming a fighter pilot is a bit of a jump there. But like so many others, he turned 18 just a few days before Pearl Harbor was attacked. And like many others, he left school. And in early January 42, he joined the Army Air Corps. And I think it was around March is when he qualified for flight training. Now, a little bit of background on that. Before World War II, in order to even just be considered for flight training, you had to have a full 4-year college degree. And I believe it was about 6 months, 8 months or so before the war started, they changed that down to 2 years of college. After we got in the war, they totally took the college thing out, but you had to pass a rigorous 2-day testing process where you did hand-eye coordination and knowledge and everything else, in addition to your flight physicals you had to do. So for my Uncle Ray, who was a carpentry student at a tech school, and basically he only went to high school 1 year, because he went to school for 1 year, and the school system out there, you went to junior high for 3 years, high school was 3 years. So he went to school for 1 year, then he left school, traveled down to the northern or the Washington D.C. area, worked as a carpenter, and he was only 16 when he left home. Went down there, worked as a carpenter for about a year at Fort Belvoir, just outside of Washington, D.C., building barracks. So he did that for about a year. In the fall of 41, came back, went back to school for a few months. Pearl Harbor was attacked, left again, joined the Army. And soon after that, he once he qualified for flight training, went to Texas, spent about 8 months down in Texas doing a lot of his flight training down there. I've had the honor of visiting a couple of the bases that he did his flight training at. In fact, at Corsicana, Texas, where he first learned how to fly several years ago. I was down there and actually got to fly in the same type of airplane that he first learned how to fly. In fact, I have a picture of him just after he landed from his first solo flight. So to be able to fly in the same type of plane, that was pretty cool. I'm hoping there's a museum in California that has a P-40 Warhawk in checker tail markings. They used to sell rides in that plane. Several years ago, they stopped, I think, after one of these old warbirds crashed. A lot of places stopped giving rides. I'm hoping sometime in the future they give rides in that plane again. That will literally be one of those priceless moments, to fly in the same type of plane that my uncle flew in combat, in the markings of the unit that he flew with. That would be absolutely fabulous.
That would be so cool.
Yeah.
So what did your dad think about you doing all this research? Is he still living, or?
Sadly, my dad passed away about 15 years back. I think he really didn't say a lot about it. Even if I started talking about his brother, you could tell he got choked up a bit. I think he was happy that I was able to find out exactly what had happened, that he did his job. His mission that day was to protect the bombers. And a couple of different sources that I have, including the bomber group that they were flying with that day. They even said the Nazis attacked very hard. And it was one of the gunners on a bomber said that was one of the toughest missions that he has ever been on. But all the bombers made it back. And it turned out my uncle got involved with a one-on-one dogfight with an ace Italian pilot that was flying a brand new type of plane, a Makati 205, and we quickly found out this plane was one of the best Axis fighters around and was equal to the best Spitfires and anything else we had. And my uncle was flying an old P-40. But it sounds like I said, the two of them got into a one-on-one dogfight. Both planes got shots in at one another. It seemed like my uncle realized that he was by himself. So it looked like he tried to break contact and get back with the other fighters. The other pilot said that he got off one last long range shot, and that's when my uncle's plane started burning. And then one from what I understand, the sort of the rules of the sky were if you're a fighter pilot and the other plane, if their canopy comes off, that's a sign that the pilot's going to bail out. So you stop shooting. And that's what the other pilot did. He did allow my uncle to bail out. But sadly he was too low for the parachute to fully work on that.
Wow, I didn't really realize there were rules that you in the sky that you fought by. That's interesting. It was
from several different books that I read, particularly the war in North Africa. If you could call it this, it was the most gentleman's war we had during World War II, particularly when the British 8th Army and Rommel's army were battled. There's several stories that after a major battle, the medics from both sides are out in the battlefield, and British medics are finding wounded German soldiers, and they're calling over to German medics as, hey, you got one over here. Or if the guy can walk, hey, your guys are over there. Go head that way back to you guys. And one of the things that I understood was Rommel flat out refused to let SS troops into Africa. He forbid them from coming. So you did not have, those type of troops there. So, different theaters sort of did things a little bit differently, but I believe most of the U.S. and British versus the Germans, Italians, stuff like that, on the Southern Front over the Med and the Western Front from England and stuff, that was sort of a gentleman type war. If you went over Russia, totally different tactic, totally different rules. If you went out to the Pacific, again, different rules. You've had several stories out there where U.S. pilots were in their parachutes coming down, and the Japanese planes are shooting at the pilots in their parachutes. So like I said, different things in different areas.
That is super fascinating to me, from a human nature standpoint, to just be aware of, to just different, every single place that the war was fought, it was fought with different rules and different strategies and philosophies. And that's super insightful to be aware of that. Looking back, you just it was all just one horrible bloody war, but it was, but just to see it was so different from different culture's way of fighting. So then you said that you are trying to write all the stories of the fighter group your uncle was in, is that right? The
Checker Tales.
Checker Tales, yeah.
Yes.
So did they mostly just fight in southern Italy, or did they move into the northern part of Europe when D-Day happened, or
Well, they started off in the 12th Air Force. They actually took brand new P-40s, flew off the carrier Ranger in January 1943. They were part of the 12th Air Force until North Africa fell and through the Battle of Sicily. Soon after that, they switched over from P-40s to P-47s, and they were moved to the new 15th Air Force. And basically what they did, they had the 12th and the 15th in the Mediterranean, and the 12th basically had medium and light bombers and fighter bombers, where the 15th Air Force had heavy bombers and the fighters to protect them. Sort of like how later out of England, you had the 8th Air Force that had the heavy bombers. Then you had the 9th Air Force that started with the British 8th Army in Egypt and they were moved around to England, I think, mid to late 43, and they had all the medium bombers that were flying out of England. So once the southern part of Italy was captured, they moved over to Italy, and they stayed in that area. They finished off the war, but they flew missions all the way as far north as Berlin. In fact, the 325th, the very first shuttle mission to Russia, the 325th flew that, and it was a 15th Air Force mission from Italy, and they're able to bomb targets a little further north and east than they would normally be able to do, because then once they bombed it, they just turned east, flew a much shorter distance to Russia, and landed there. And then they had a few days to service the planes and stuff, and then they flew back, and they did another bombing mission, and then flew back down to Italy. And the 8th Air Force, some of their shuttle missions, they flew out, bombed their targets, went to Russia. Then on the way back, they flew out, bombed targets, came down to Italy to refuel, rearm, and then they flew from Italy back to England and did another bombing raid there. Yeah. In fact, I was just reading a thing when I think it was this date in 1945 when several airborne units were launched across the Rhine River into Germany. And there's one post I saw was making a big deal about how, the 8th Air Force and the 9th Air Force did everything. Well, the 325th and the 15th Air Force, they had a major raid on Berlin that day. So, they were doing that to try to keep the fighters and stuff away from the airborne units going in over the Rhine. So a lot of times you had different units, even though they're thousands of miles apart, they would coordinate things to try to do stuff to help to help out one another there.
Yeah, so it's like that a pestering, a bee bugging you so that you don't see the wolf attacking you, it's yes. Like something's distracting you so you don't see what's coming in from behind. So that's really cool to know that, we could work with all our allies and all just try to broaden our forces and be successful at fighting the war that way. So do you have any other stories from his unit to share with us of
yes.
those fallen?
Yes. One of them is a gentleman by the name of Bart Judge. And I came across his name. I was rereading Herky Green's book, or part of his book, because I'm always going back to these books to get some more details. And Herky Green turned out to be one of the top aces in all of Europe. And Bart was actually killed stateside as the 325th was being worked up and stuff. And I thought, well, shoot, I'm concentrating on people that were killed overseas, but here's a person, a member of the 325th, and he was killed stateside. But he was born in Pennsylvania in 1918, and he was the third child in that family. He joined his sister Mildred, who was 14 at the time, and Margaret, that was 2. His dad was a manager, a distribution company. That was for the 1920 census, and they were in Lackawanna, Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, Bart's parents divorced sometime before the 1940 census. So when I was able to find his draft card dated October 1940, and he was living with his mom, and he joined the Army Air Corps in September of 1941, qualified for flight training. He was in flight class 42D, D as in Delta. And him and Herky Green went all through flight training together, and he came out of flight training at Foster Field in Victoria, Texas, which is the same base that my uncle graduated from about 6 months later. And got his wings in April. And a few months later, both of them were sent to the Boston area where the 325th was first being formed, and they were part of the Boston Air Defense Wing at that time. And they spent about 3 months getting everyone together, getting everyone trained. The pilots were flying missions. They were doing some anti-sub patrols. They also, I think it was 4 pilots every day was at a airport in Boston. So if radar picked up some planes that they didn't know what they were, usually they were aeroliners flying in, and the pilots just forgot to check in. Well, they would get scrambled, have to go out and, check out the plane, make sure that what it was. And then the pilot's like, oh, we got a fighter off our wing. Then they hurry up and call in and say, hey, this is flight so-and-so. But Bart was killed on December 22nd, 1942, during a routine training flight over Cape Cod, and was not able to find out why his plane crashed. Unfortunately, he and his plane was not found for several days. If there is winter weather, a lot of times that area, cloudy, drizzly, different things like that. So it was hard to find. But he was one of the first checkertails that was killed in the line of duty. In fact, Herky mentioned in his book, they had a Navy airship help with the search, and he actually was able to go on the airship and fly around with them. And he made a comment, I forget the exact wording, but he said, all these Navy guys got it good. Soon after the airship launched, the chef on the airship said, how do you want your steak? So they had lunch while they're searching for him. And Bart, after everything happened, the family had his body taken back to Pennsylvania, where he's buried there.
It's surprising how many airplane accidents there were on American soil during World War II. Like, I think if people had the real numbers, they would be totally shocked to hear. You know, it was not every time you got in that plane, you took your life. I mean, put your life on the line. It was,
yeah, because you had new pilots, new air crews, new maintenance people. A lot of times, you know, it was like, oh, the newest and greatest planes were going overseas to war. So we had these old, tired, worn out planes back here for training and stuff, you know, and you know, so some different things happened there. In fact, in the 3 months that the 325th was working up, they had 5 fatal plane crashes. And I think about 20 or 25 total things happened with planes that were severe enough that an accident report had to be made. You know, and Bart was one of those 5 that were killed stateside.
So, your uncle, he would have. So Bart seems a lot older than your uncle, right? I mean,
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Was he then had a college degree, or had they already lowered that standard and he was just an older?
Bart had I believe he had 4 years of college. Let me just double check here. Yeah, he had a full 4-year degree.
Wow. Just I always wonder, like, what made them join? You know, if you're a college graduate, you know, you got the world ahead of you. Like, what made them want to, you know, take the riskiest job there was in the war? I feel like, you know, was flying airplanes at that time. I mean, maybe there were more risky ones, but it's always just a curiosity of mine. Obviously, we probably never know, but.
Yeah.